Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the 1100 project with me, Stuart White. It's been a little while since we last had an episode of the 1100 project. It's about 2 months, if I look back correctly. And so today's episode is going to be a little bit of a catch up and a summary of all that's been happening since I last spoke with you, as well as looking in more depth at some of the various stages that I've gone through in my self publication journey and process. So, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you if you're listening to this and if you've stuck by the project despite the long time between the episodes. It really does mean so much to me that so many of you are tuning in to listen to it or to watch it if you're looking at it on YouTube. And it means a lot to me that I've had so much support about this self-publishing project and journey that I've gone upon. One of the real joys that I get out of it is about sharing the process and hopefully giving people an idea of what it's like, maybe a bit of advice and some tips that might help you if you're going to self-publish yourself at some point in the future, or perhaps you're just coming along for the narrative, for the story, to see how things pan out and to see if I can achieve the reasonably ambitious goal that I've set myself in this project. So thank you if you are still listening and you are still with me. I really do appreciate it. So what has been happening over the last 2 months since I last spoke to you? Well, it's been quite a challenging time for me, to be perfectly honest, and that's part of the reason why there's been such a long period of silence. I don't think I could manage to have the capacity to record any episodes during the last 2 months, simply because of everything that's been going on up here. As writers, we suffer quite severely, I think, from imposter syndrome, from self doubt, from valuing ourselves as creatives and the work that we do. And it can be quite easy as time goes on to forget about why we took up writing and why it is we want our books to be published. And I think for quite a while I had forgotten that, and I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. I was extracting all of the joy from the process, and I was forgetting to do the things that brought me happiness and brought me into writing in the first place, and were the core motivators in me wanting to write books for children. So I think that when that goes away, it can become quite laborious and feel quite quite difficult to continue at times and to slog through the more difficult times. So that's a little bit of a psychoanalysis of my headspace over the last couple of months. However, the good news is I've finally, I think, gotten over that, and I've gotten through the thick sludge, the depth of the swamp of despair, and I'm through the other side now. I'm slowly wading back out again, and I can feel a lot more freedom and movement and joy in what I'm doing as I'm progressing forward at this stage. So for me, anyway, that's a big positive. And I suppose, if you're a creative as well, you'll probably empathise and understand with a lot of what I've just been discussing there. So what have I actually been doing then during that time? Well, I think when I last spoke to you, I was talking a little bit about going into editing, and I think this is one of the big lessons I've learned from undertaking this project, is that more time needs to be allocated to the editing process. Not so much because more time is needed to actually do the edits, just because you need thinking time, you need processing time, you need brainstorming time. You also need some time off as well during that process, because it's 4 rounds. It's quite, and I actually ended up doing more. It's quite hefty and severe, and it's quite draining on your mind, your creative part of your mind, if you're constantly thinking about your story and doing your edits, especially those big picture edits where you're you're looking at character arcs, you're looking at the whole story, the whole plot, and how things interconnect. And when you make small changes at one part, the whole ripple effect, it has big ramifications later on or earlier on in the story, and you have to follow that ripple all the way through to the end and correct anything that might be out of sync as a result of that small change you initially made. And so, yeah, I found that whole process really, really difficult. Part of it is because in my head, I wanted to, when I got my edits back from Emma, I wanted to improve upon every single thing that she suggested perhaps could be looked at. And I wasn't being selective enough or focused enough on my own original vision for the story. And I was being waylaid and diverted off on all these different paths. And a lot of them were conflicting paths as well, which made it very difficult for me to come to a firm and certain decision about a lot of the editorial vision for the story. So that in itself was down to me, and something that I've learned a lesson from, and hopefully I'll be able to correct again in the future. Because, you know, notwithstanding having had a lot of editorial feedback before via various means, that was the first time I'd done it for a book that I knew was going to be published, and it had such a short timescale and so on that I guess I was just putting a lot of pressure on myself, and it took me a while to work through all that. But I did eventually, and I think, as I say, I got through the developmental part of it, and what I had to do actually in the end, and this is good advice if you find yourself in a similar position. What I had to do in the end was just accept that I wasn't going to be able to follow all of those rabbits down all of those holes and correct and perfect every single strand in the story. There's just things that you kind of have to leave, because if you tug at them, it unravels other parts of the story, and you've got to just say, okay, it's maybe imperfect, that particular aspect, but there's little point me removing that or changing that, because it's got bigger ramifications which will actually weaken the story overall. So there's a balancing act to be had there with the edits. So yeah, developmental editing was a real challenge for me, and as I say, went through more than one round of that as a result. I think when we went on to line and copy edits, that things were a bit easier. Although you still have challenges with certain sections. But parts are being suggested to be removed to speed up the pace of the novel, and sometimes you go with it, and then other times you say, "Well, actually, I think this is core to character development, or this is core to something that happens later in the novel, and I need this in here at this point, even at the cost perhaps of it maybe slowing the pace of the novel a wee bit." And that's, I guess, a decision you have to make as the author when you're getting suggestions from an editor on what to take, and obviously what to maybe leave alone. And again, I started finding that easier the more I made those decisions to leave things alone. And that's, again, whether you're doing this independently or whether you're doing it with a publishing house editor. That's, I think, a good bit of advice to keep in mind when you're going through that as well. Ultimately, you know the story best. You know what has to be in there. You know what's at the heart of the story. And while the suggestions are almost always good, they come from someone else who's looking at your story from the outside, and you've got to, as much as you take that on board, you've got to make the final call on your own. So yeah, line edits were okay. Copy edits, again, fine. A few things to alter, a few things to check, but I don't think anything that was earth shattering. And so I managed to move through those at a fairly rapid pace. And then proofs were quite nice, actually. Proofs, just a few accept track changes and so on. So it wasn't too bad, actually. It's funny because I guess I envisaged those last couple of steps as being much bigger than they actually were. And it's nice when an editor says something like, "Oh, that wasn't too laborious. I didn't have to spend too much time in that. I didn't have to make too many changes or whatever." Because that I guess is some justification for all the time that you spent doing self editing in the past, and working on the manuscripts on your own. I think that as well. This is a manuscript I've been working on for a number of years now. It's been through several iterations. It's had previous edits and read throughs and beta feedback, which I'm going to talk about in a minute as well, that has helped shape it into something that's, I think, in reasonably good shape. So that's obviously a factor too. And maybe if you're someone who has a draft that's not really been looked at much by anyone else, then you'd maybe have a more extensive time with the various parts of your edits as well. But for me, I think now that I'm at the other end of it, I've got a very different perspective in editing. I think when my time comes again, and it will, whether that's via traditional pathway or the independent pathway that I'm going through now, I will have a different outlook, a different methodology and approach, and I think I'll be kinder to myself through the process as well, and allow it to not consume me in the same way that it has this time. So yeah, editing is now done. I'm glad to say. I, even in the last few days, have been making small tweaks and changes, but I finally said to myself that that's enough for now, and I've moved on to other aspects of the publication process. And so just moving on to those various things, it's quite a multifaceted next step if you're publishing on your own independently, and there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of different skills that are involved in the next stage. So, the editing, as much as it was difficult for me, that's a core skill for an author, whether you go through trad or self publication. And so it's something that everyone's familiar with, and they'll maybe understand and empathize. But the next stage is where traditionally published authors would pass on their manuscript to their publication house. And aside from a few bits and pieces, the majority of their job is then done. And the publication house takes over and they deal with all the various aspects I'm about to talk about now. But these are skills that I've had to learn, and these are tasks that I've had to implement in order to progress with publishing my novel. And it's been a steep learning curve. I've read a lot of blog posts. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos to help me with these various things. I signed up for 2 courses to learn the aspects from people who have done it a lot of times. And I feel like I'm on top of things now, but there was a time there where I was looking at a long list of things I had to do in quite a short space of time, and I was questioning whether I A, had the time, B, the capacity, and C, the skill set to carry them out. And as I say, I'm a little bit more on top of them now, so I'm feeling a bit more confident, and that's probably why I feel like I've got the headspace to record this episode at this time as well. So that's what I've been working on. So just to go through each of the individual aspects in case you're interested and you maybe want to go down this road yourself, and to talk through the skill sets and the processes that are involved for those of you who are interested. So the first thing I had to look at was when you upload your manuscript to the 2 main places that you'll be uploading it to, which is Amazon KDP and Ingram Spark. For both of them, you require your cover, and that's a ebook cover, which is just obviously the front, and a paperback cover, which is front and back, including the back matter like the blurb and any cover quotes or similar that you've got there as well. Now, it's more of a tricky process than you might imagine, because you have to have a finished manuscript in order to know how many pages your book is, and therefore how thick the book is, and that has an impact on the size of the spine, and the trim and the edges, and and so on for your book. And obviously your illustrator or cover designer needs to then adjust the cover based upon those measurements as well. So there's been a bit of back and forth between myself and Jen, who's the cover illustrator for this novel, in the last few days to try and nail that down. In order to get the page number upon which all these cover alterations and measurements depend upon, I had to format the novel and put it into a format, a state that would allow me to upload it and for it to be either distributed as an ebook or to be printed as part of the print and demand services that KDP and Ingram Spark have. So the the manuscript itself has to be formatted. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. I know people who have just learned how to do format, and they've done it maybe in a Microsoft Word document, and maybe then exported it to PDF at a later date to then upload it on, because it needs to be in PDF form for Amazon KDP and Ingram Spark. And actually, I think Ingram Spark maybe accept Word docs as well. But regardless, they've had to learn the skill themselves, and that I can't imagine doing that. The amount of time and effort and research that must go into doing that, because being a formatter, that's a proper skill and job for an individual. So it's not like something you can just pick up in 5 or 10 minutes. I know my friend Emma Bradley. I think she formats her books herself, and she said she spent a lot of hours and a lot of sweat and tears learning how to do that. So I just didn't have the time or capacity to do that. Now, luckily, there are a couple of different formatting softwares out there, depending on the computer that you use. So I use a Mac, so the formatting software for Mac is called Vellum, and it's a very, very good formatting software. I really like it. It's very intuitive. It's not too labor intensive in terms of once you upload your Word document to Vellum, it converts it into all the formats that you need for every single platform that you might want to publish on, whether that's Amazon or Google or all the various platforms. I can't remember them all off the top of my head now. Got a bit of stage fright there, but there's a number of different ones, as well as the print copy, which is all important as well. So that actually just does all that process for you. You do have to spend a wee bit of time learning the intricacies of it if you want to add things like contents, acknowledgements about the author page, a wee title page as well, a copyright page, as well as just understanding how changes you make in the Vellum software have an impact on the final PDF that it distributes at the other end, or the EPUB file if it's for Kindle. So there's a bit of a learning curve to it, but it's nowhere near as much as if you learn how to manually format it. Now, I believe for Word, there's an equivalent called Atticus. I've never used it, and I've not really looked it up, so I don't know too much about it. But if you use Word rather than, sorry, not Word, if you use a PC rather than an Apple Mac, then you can go and look up Atticus. I think that's the equivalent software for PC. But Vellum's the one, as I say, that I use for Mac, and I think it is Mac exclusive at the moment. So you can only get it if you have an Apple Mac. In terms of price, I think it was just under £200 I paid for it, and that seems like a lot for formatting software, but that's a lifetime purchase. So I've spent that money now, and I'll never have to spend another penny on formatting. So if I decide I'm going to self-publish 3 or 5 or 10 books, then obviously over the cost of all those books, I'm saving. There's a there's a bit of an outlay initially, but you save in the long term. And as I say, for me anyway, I'm looking at this as a long term thing. It's a career. It's an investment in my writing and my books that are to come. So I'm quite happy to have that initial outlay. So that's formatting, and as I say, that takes a while. It does take a while to do, but I have now got all of the finished files that I want. Because, and the thing is with formatting as well, it's like another layer of editing almost, where you do still have to read through your manuscript again on the formatting software, albeit maybe not as in depth as you did for edits, to just check that everything is formatted properly. And when you upload them to KDP and Ingram Spark as well, there is a check that you can go through, a preview for both of them, and you can sort of check how it looks on those before you approve it for print or for ebook, depending on which one you're doing with the various distributors. So yeah, there's a wee bit to do there, but for me anyway, I've done that now, and I've got my format and badge tick, and yeah, that's all done. And of course that the lead on of that is that I can then I was then able to let Jen know about the the spine width according to the page number and all the other little bits and bobs. So they have now been uploaded, and I've got the final cover from her, and that's looking great as well. She's made a couple of wee sort of final alterations, which I love as well. And I should actually mention at this stage that I got a lovely cover quote from Vashti, who I know through Right Mentor, and who was kind enough to read an early copy of Ghost of Mars. And she gave, you've probably seen the cover quote if you've seen my Twitter feed, but or follow my newsletter. But she sent me a very long email, and it was really really nice. And it's one of those, I guess, one of those big moments as an author, and when you're going through this route, especially, you don't get a lot of validation. If you're going trad, you've got your agent gushing about your book, you've got an editor who's had to convince a whole acquisitions team to buy your book, and you've got loads of cheerleaders in your corner, or certainly a few. Whereas going this indie route, you're pretty much, get the pom poms out yourself, cheering yourself along. So to get that level of validation, that such nice comments from someone else, was incredible, and it was a really nice moment for me, actually. And actually, as I'm speaking about it now, is the first time I've really, I think, taken it in. It's, at the time I was just busy, and I was like, oh yeah, I can, I need to do X, Y, Z next, blah blah blah, and blah. But it's a nice moment. And what I've discovered as well through asking various people if they'll read an early copy of the book is that if you have a pre-existing relationship with someone, and you've maybe done something for them in the past, it doesn't have to be a reciprocal relationship like that, but if you have done something good for them in the past and helped them out or whatever, then it's like karma. These things tend to come back, and I've been lucky that I've received some love towards the book, and people willing to read it a little bit early. Anyway, that's just a little aside, and I'll talk a little bit more about early readers in a short while. So I added the cover quote of Vashti onto the cover as well, and as I say, it's looking quite good now, and it's uploaded to Ingram Spark and KDP now, which is awesome. The next step for me is I've ordered a little proof copy, which is printed now with the new spine and the new width and so on. Because I bought an earlier proof of the book, but things have changed in terms of page number and so on since then. So I'm just checking that it still looks good when it's printed, because it's obviously print on demand, which means that you don't necessarily get all of the copies identical when they get distributed to people. And I guess that's one of the things you have to accept when you go print on demand, is that there will be variability in terms of the quality and the finish of the product. But as long as it's in the ballpark and it's very close to what I want, I'll approve that very soon when I receive the proof copy, and hopefully I can put it out for paperback pre-orders in the next week or two, which is really exciting, because a lot of people have said that they want to wait to do the paperback pre-order rather than pre-ordering on the Kindle edition for the book. So I'm excited to get that out, and hopefully get some pre-orders in, get some people reading the book paperback, and just in getting it out into the world. Now I made an alteration on my launch date. I was supposed to go 16th of January, Monday the 16th, so in just under 2 weeks. But I decided, just to give myself more breathing room, to put a little bit less stress on myself, to be kinder to myself in terms of the build up, and because obviously I'm doing this on my own, and I'm accountable only to myself, I was able to do this, and I moved the publication date, the launch date, from Monday the 16th of January to Monday the 13th of February. And those extra 4 weeks have honestly made the world of difference. And I definitely think that the next time I self-publish a book, I'll be looking at the timeline, and obviously using my experience this time, but also using certain markers to then space out where things need to go in the timeline, because I've not maybe done that as well. In fact, I know I haven't done that as well this time round as I could have, and that's obviously resulted in this little delay that I've had to put in. But I think everyone understands, and no one's sitting there thinking on the 16th of January, if only I had my Ghosts of Mars book right now. They'll all be quite happy to wait a few weeks, I'm sure. So yeah, take the pressure off yourself, and just if you have to just put in a wee small delay like that, I think it's fine. And as I say, next time looking at the timelines, I maybe wouldn't put such a tight schedule on myself, and just try and give myself some space so I can enjoy it. It's supposed to be an enjoyable process. It's supposed to be about empowerment and doing things your own way, and that should be enjoyable. It shouldn't feel like such a strain. And that's again something that I'm learning a lot through doing this process. So yeah, the launch date has been moved. And speaking of launches, I have just published and announced the online launch for the book, which is going to be on the launch day, Monday the 13th of February in the evening at 7 p.m. If you fancy come along, if you go to my Twitter, I think it's the pinned post on there. If you go to the latest newsletter that I've sent out as well, there's a link there for you to register and sign up to join us live for that. If you don't think you can join us live in the Zoom room, then you can follow on the Right Mentor YouTube page. I'm going to live stream it simultaneously. And when you do a live stream on YouTube, it saves as a recording on there, which means that anyone can go back and watch it at their own leisure at a later date. And it saves you the hassle of sort of editing and uploading and moving around video files for people. They can just go straight onto YouTube and they can watch it there if you're so inclined to watch the launch. I'm really looking forward to it though. Melissa and Florian have kindly agreed to host it, which means I've got a bit less responsibility, and that's good to sort of distribute that, because it is a lot of pressure doing the self-publishing gig. So having someone else there to help you out and to take control of things is going to be a nice feeling, I think, on launch night. So if you can join me, come along for that. We're going to do some fun stuff. We're going to have a wee chat. We're going to talk a little bit about the book, etc. So anyone who fancies coming along, then you are very, very welcome, especially if you listen to this podcast. I'd love to have you along for it. So that's 4 weeks away, and there's a wee bit of a build up to that, because although the files are ready and it's almost ready to just press publish and so on, I want to have a little bit of time where I can set up for pre-orders and and get people to pre-order the book, and those will then obviously be through the system. And I'll maybe explain this more in a different video, but through the pre-order on Ingram Spark, you then leave the paperback version on draft and KDP, and then you press publish on publication day, and then I think it distributes via the KDP print on demand model. It's a long story. I can explain it in a different episode in more depth, but it means all those pre-orders go out just before or on launch day, which is very exciting. So yeah, that's why I'm keen to have a wee bit of breathing spaces to have those pre-orders in place and for people to get excited and look forward to the book arriving. And it also gives me time to send out a few more copies, maybe some paperback copies as well, to some early readers. Send out advanced reader copies, or ARCs as they're shortened to, which is a part of the traditional publishing process, and therefore I want to make it part of my own process as well in terms of publishing the book, because as I've repeated many times before in this podcast, I do want to make this process as close as I can to a traditional publishing process, and not to skip steps or to shortchange the process. I want to do it in line with how it would be done at a traditional publisher. And so, obviously, ARC's going out to people who read it in advance is an important step. And hopefully, those who do read it before publication will maybe give some reviews or tweet about it, or talk about if they've enjoyed it, which would be lovely. And obviously, that obviously builds up towards publication day, builds up some of the hype, if hype's the right word, surrounding the book. So that's the latest. That's where I'm up to. I'm going to distribute those ARCs in the next week or two once I've just checked that proof and that everything looks good. I will be doing a little bit of marketing and publicity work as well. I'm going to get Florian to help me a little bit with that, but just sort of trying to build awareness of the book to make sure that we get some media outlets as well, and maybe I don't know, maybe get on a few blogs or other various places online, and get a bit of a mention of the book in different places, because I've got my own channels through which to talk about the book, but probably everyone on there already knows about it. I've certainly mentioned it often enough, and so to get it through via different channels is what the plan is for the next few weeks, and just increase awareness of it, because as they say, if you don't know about something, you can't buy something and read something. So that's the plan over the next few weeks or so, and that'll keep me busy working all that out. One thing that a couple of people have asked me about, and it was something I toyed with a few weeks back, was doing an in-person launch. At the moment, I'm leaning towards not doing that, and if I'm going to do it, I obviously need to get a shimmy on and organise that in the next few days. But just time and money and practicalities and so on mean that I might not be able to do that at this particular moment, or even this time round with the novel, which is a shame. But it's just the way things have worked out. Again, if I was to have my time again and do all this all over, I would have had all the stuff that I've just done recently done months ago, and therefore had the time and the energy to organise an in-person launch down south maybe, or in Glasgow or Edinburgh, or somewhere up near my way. But I just haven't had the time for that, and I think mentally that might just be a bit much. And that, again, that's the issue with doing indie publishing as opposed to trad, is a lot of this stuff I've just been talking about, the publisher would deal with, and you could, and that, this is another thing that I think I might burst some bubbles here, but most of my trad published friends are not getting big launches arranged for them. You might see that for a few of the big hitters, but for most people, the publisher, if you ask them nicely, might give you 100 quid or 150 quid towards your book launch, but you essentially have to organise it yourself. So in that regard, I'm not really any better off or worse off through my particular pathway, but because of all those other things on my plate, it just means that the launch has not quite taken the priority that I would have liked to have done. But that's just the way it is. I think with the indie way of life, you have to balance what is essential to do and what would be nice to do, and I've got to do the essentials, and the nice stuff maybe has to be sacrificed in order to do that. So that's just how it is. So that pretty much brings me up to date. Next up for me is as I say, doing the publicity and marketing and seeing how much we can get the book out there and spread the word about it. For those of you who are listening and who already are doing that, and who are quote tweeting and retweeting any mention I put of it online, and who follow my newsletter, and who maybe have even pre-ordered the Kindle version, or are going to pre-order the paperback version when it comes out, I just want to say thank you for your support. It's always appreciated and never taken for granted. So thank you so much for doing that. And obviously, if you listen to the podcast and you want to ask me any questions, or you want to say anything at all about what I discussed, then just reach out. You can DM me on Twitter, or just at me on Twitter, or send me an email, reply to my newsletter email that comes out. If you hit reply, it should come back to me again, and you can talk to me about anything to do with self-publishing, or going down the indie route, which is an exciting route, but obviously involves a lot. So it's also quite all-consuming, which, on top of everything else in life, can be quite a lot. But yeah, I think I'll just maybe finish off in a pondering of I think that anyone could self-publish. Anyone at all could self-publish. And I know I've talked about paying lots of people to do various things, but ultimately you don't have to pay anything to self-publish a novel. And I think, as I say, anyone can do it. There's no real limit to or restriction on who can do it. I guess the big question when it comes to self-publishing is not whether you could self-publish a novel, it's whether you should. And for me, the answer was yes. It was a choice that I made rather than a different one. But it won't be for everyone. And I enjoy learning new skills. I enjoy sitting, slogging out long, boring, repetitive tasks at times. And I know that that's a bit of an oxymoron, more on there, saying I enjoy those things, but I do quite like that. I think it's in my personality type, but that's not for everyone. The other thing, of course, is the business side of things, and that's another thing actually I haven't mentioned that I've sorted out in the last few weeks, is setting up the business and the bank account and so on for my indie publishing business, because you have to keep track of any money you earn, you have to keep track of money that goes out. And if you treat it like a business, then there's a lot of relief and savings and tax things that you can do if you set up a business and a bank account that's associated with that, rather than, as a lot of people do, just paying the money into their own personal account. And then it gets all messy in terms of, your personal allowance for your income and working it out at tax time and so on. And you don't get the benefits as well of different things businesses can do with tax. And that, I guess that's another another episode right there, talking about all those little aspects and nuances of the business side of things. But yeah, you've got to have that kind of mind. And so, as much as indie and self-publishing can be for everyone, it's not necessarily for everyone because of the reasons I've just outlined. So anyway, I'm getting to that stage where I'm starting to rabbit on, so I'm gonna call it quits there. But thanks so much for listening to the latest episode of the 1100 project, and I'll see you all next time. May the force be with you.